I never imagined the day would start like that, with my daughter gasping for air, her tiny fingers clawing at her chest as I held her in my arms, helpless. Her face had turned pale, her lips blue. I called 911 with trembling hands, screaming into the phone while praying she wouldn't lose consciousness before help arrived. Within minutes, we heard the ambulance siren, a sound that should have brought hope. But when I looked out the window, my heart dropped. The vehicle was stuck, not in traffic, not behind a car accident, but at the front gate of our so-called secure HOA community. And there she stood, Karen, our HOA president, arms crossed, jaw clenched, standing tall in front of the gate like a soldier guarding a fortress. "This is private property," she barked to the EMTs. "You can't enter without authorization." I ran outside barefoot, my voice hoarse from yelling. "My daughter's dying." I screamed. "She can't breathe." But Karen didn't move, didn't even flinch. She glanced at me like I was an inconvenience, like my daughter's life was some kind of exaggeration or neighborhood drama. The EMTs pleaded, but the gate remained shut. I dropped to my knees, begging, crying, watching the seconds bleed away. I could hear my child's shallow breaths growing weaker behind me, and all I could think was, what if this delay costs her everything? What kind of person does this? What kind of system lets them? Was my daughter going to die because of a rule? We weren't looking for luxury, just peace. After years of sleepless nights, in city hospitals, therapy sessions, and emergency room visits, my husband and I finally saved enough to move into a neighborhood that promised safety, community, and quiet. Our daughter, Lily, was born with a rare neuromuscular condition that made even a simple cold life-threatening. But she was a fighter. At 6 years old, she had already endured more surgeries than most people face in a lifetime, and yet she smiled through it all, always clutching her stuffed bunny and whispering, "Mommy, I'm okay." Every breath she took was a gift, and we guarded it like gold. When we first pulled into Willow Creek Estates, the HOA community, it looked like a dream. Neatly trimmed lawns, pastel-colored houses, neighbors who waved. The glossy brochure said it all, a perfect place for families. We believed it. We moved in during spring, and for a short while, it felt like life might finally give us a break. I planted flowers. My husband built a small ramp for Lily's wheelchair. We even got her a therapy dog, Max, who never left her side. She would giggle as he tugged her socks or nuzzled her cheek after a hard night. For the first time, she had a backyard to play in, a life beyond hospital walls. And then we met Karen. She was the president of the HOA, introduced herself the day we moved in with a firm handshake and a clipboard. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We're happy to have you here," she said, scanning our moving truck. "Just remember, everything here follows community guidelines." At first, we didn't think much of it. Rules are rules. We signed the HOA paperwork like everyone else. But then came the letters. The first was about the ramp, visually intrusive. Then one about Max, certain breeds not permitted. A month later, we got fined because Lily's in-home nurse parked her car inappropriately. Another warning: frequent medical visits may create traffic congestion. I remember reading that line twice, stunned. Traffic congestion? In a cul-de-sac where kids rode scooters all afternoon? I tried to speak to Karen to explain our situation, but she cut me off. "We have to be fair to everyone," she said sharply. "Exceptions create loopholes. Loopholes become problems." Little by little, the community we hoped would be a sanctuary started to feel like a cage. Neighbors stopped waving. Our front door got silent stares instead of kind hellos. Karen started attending our HOA inspections herself, walking around with her clipboard, noting everything. "That ramp doesn't meet aesthetic code," she muttered once. Another time, when Lily was being lifted into her chair, Karen stood at the sidewalk, arms crossed. "This community wasn't designed for high-maintenance families," she said, just loud enough for me to hear. Still, we stayed, because moving again wasn't an option, financially or emotionally. And Lily, God bless her, loved the house. She'd draw chalk butterflies on the driveway and call them her breathing wings. I told myself we could handle the rules, the fines, the glares, that it would all be worth it if we just kept our heads down and focused on Lily. But I was wrong. We weren't safe here. We were never welcome. And the woman with the clipboard wasn't just enforcing rules. She was building a wall, one that would almost cost my daughter her life. It started with the ramp, and it never stopped. The HOA, led by Karen, transformed into something far more sinister than a neighborhood watch. It became a surveillance system with a single goal: to make us feel like intruders in our own home. Every week brought a new notice, a new violation, a new reminder that we were different, and that difference wasn't welcome here. The second notice arrived just 3 days after Lily's 7th birthday. It was about balloons. Yes, balloons. We had tied a small bunch to our mailbox, pink and white, her favorite, for her physical therapist and a few neighbors who were bringing cupcakes. Lily had been so excited, sitting by the window with Max by her side, waiting to show off her new drawing pad. But Karen had different plans. That afternoon, a formal envelope was taped to our door. Unapproved outdoor decor. Violates mailbox aesthetic uniformity, along with a $75 fine. I tried to laugh it off at first. It's just balloons, I told myself. Just a petty rule. But when I looked at Lily, her face falling as I unwrapped the string from the mailbox, something cracked. That was the first time I cried in the garage, alone, holding a piece of paper that made me feel like a criminal for being a mother. The following week, it was the front yard. Lily's wheelchair had left tiny divots in the grass after a therapy session. The next morning, we received a warning about landscaping damage and non-uniform ground wear. I stared at the letter, numb. My husband tried to joke about it. What's next? A ticket for breathing? But even he couldn't hide the fatigue in his eyes. Then came the board meetings. Karen began bringing up our family in official HOA gatherings. I know this because one of the newer neighbors, a young woman named Nicole, quietly slipped me her meeting notes under a grocery bag one day. They said your daughter's medical needs were disruptive, she whispered. That too many ambulance visits reflect badly on the community. My blood went cold. Ambulance visits? I repeated. We've had 3 in 6 months. She nearly died twice. Nicole looked around nervously. They're making it sound like you're endangering the neighborhood's peace. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, listing every HOA complaint we'd received. It filled 2 pages. The therapy dog was next. Max, Lily's fluffy golden retriever, had become her lifeline. He was trained to alert us if her breathing changed during the night. But the HOA didn't care. We got a letter titled, Unauthorized Animal, Breed Not Registered. We had already submitted documents, certifications, everything. I called Karen directly. She didn't answer, of course. But her assistant, a woman named Carol, left a voicemail. We've had complaints about dog noise and allergy concerns. You'll need to remove the animal until the board reviews it. When I told Lily, she clutched Max's collar so tightly that her knuckles turned white. He's my best friend, she whispered. He helps me breathe. That evening, I sat on the edge of her bed and watched her cry into his fur, her frail little arms shaking. I had never felt so powerless. I wanted to scream, to burn that stupid HOA rulebook to ash, but I had no one to scream at. Just forms, just fines, just walls. I decided to fight it. I printed out every doctor's note. I highlighted ADA regulations. I wrote letters. I even drove 2 hours to speak to a lawyer who specialized in housing discrimination. She listened carefully, took notes, and told me the case had merit, but she warned me. These HOAs are built to exhaust you, she said. They'll drain your money, your time, and your spirit before they admit they're wrong. She was right. The more I pushed back, the more Karen pushed forward. Now the complaints were daily. Improper garbage bin placement. Unauthorized mailbox font. Curb appeal deficiencies. My personal favorite, excessive emotional display during board meetings. That one made me laugh for a second before I broke down in the car again, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers cramped. But the cruelest attack came during the holidays. Lily had spent the entire month drawing handmade cards for neighbors. We'd planned to place a little sign in the yard, a snowflake cut out. She colored with Max beside her. "Hope lives here," it said. It was innocent, sweet, a little girl's way of celebrating something joyful. The sign didn't last 24 hours. That night, a new violation arrived in the mailbox: unauthorized signage, offensive messaging. Offensive. That's the word they used. Offensive. I walked into Lily's room with tears already sliding down my cheeks. "They didn't like the sign, baby," I told her gently. She tilted her head. "But it said hope." She looked down at her lap. "Did I do something bad?" My heart shattered. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "You did something beautiful. They just don't understand beauty." The next HOA meeting was held 2 days before Christmas. Karen opened with a statement about maintaining the integrity of community standards. She never mentioned us by name. She didn't have to. Every resident knew who the problem was. When I raised my hand to speak, she ignored me. When I stood up, she tapped the gavel and called for order. "We have procedures," she snapped. "This is not the time for personal grievances." Nicole tried to support me. She spoke up. She asked the board why our family was being singled out. She was silenced too. The board voted on a new bylaw that night, one requiring pre-approval for any medical service vehicle entering the community. The rule passed 5-1. Nicole was the only no. I remember leaving that meeting and sitting in my car under the cold December moonlight. I stared at the dashboard at my trembling hands. I thought about selling the house, about running, about disappearing. But then I pictured Lily, her tiny chest rising and falling as she slept, Max curled at her feet, and I knew I couldn't give up. That's when the surveillance started. Karen installed new cameras at the gate. At first, we were told it was for security. Then neighbors started mentioning that Karen had footage of me taking Lily to the hospital, footage of Max relieving himself on our lawn, footage of my husband returning home too late. It wasn't security. It was stalking. One night, I received an anonymous email. Just 3 words: "She's watching everything." Attached was a screen grab, me carrying Lily, wrapped in blankets, toward the front door during a seizure episode. The timestamp was 2:17 a.m. I showed it to my husband. He turned pale. "This is sick," he said. "This isn't about rules anymore. This is war." I nodded. "And we're losing." Still, I tried to protect Lily from the worst of it. I told her Karen was just confused, that the neighborhood was still our home. But kids are perceptive. One day, while I was folding laundry, Lily looked up at me and said, "Does Miss Karen hate me?" I froze. "No, baby," I lied. "She just doesn't know how to be kind." Lily nodded solemnly. "Maybe she needs Max more than I do." I nearly choked on my tears. The final straw, the moment where I knew something terrible was coming, was the emergency contact meeting. The HOA called a special session to review community emergency response procedures. I wasn't invited, but Nicole smuggled me a copy of the agenda. One item caught my eye: restricted access protocol for non-resident emergency vehicles. I called Karen's office. No answer. I emailed. Nothing. I went to her door. She didn't open it. 3 days later, we received a letter. New policy: all emergency medical services must receive advance HOA clearance or be accompanied by a resident at the gate. That was it. The moment everything clicked. They were preparing for something, not protecting the neighborhood, but restricting us, controlling even our ability to survive. I remember staring at that letter for hours, numb. My daughter's life on the line, and now it had to be scheduled? I crumpled the notice, walked into the living room, and sat next to Lily. She was drawing again, little stars this time. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "We're going to be okay." But in my heart, I wasn't sure. And I had no idea that in just a few days, everything would come crashing down, all because of one locked gate and one woman's obsession with control. It happened on a Tuesday morning, one of those oddly quiet days when the world feels too still, like it's holding its breath. Lily had been coughing all night. At first, it was soft, like the kind she usually had when the air was too dry. But by sunrise, her breathing had changed. Shallow, wheezy, wet. I recognized that sound, the early warning sign of a respiratory collapse. I rushed to her room and found her curled under her blanket, eyes wide with fear, lips tinged with blue. "Mama," she rasped, her voice thinner than air. "It's hard to breathe." I didn't hesitate. I scooped her up in my arms, yelling for my husband as I pressed the emergency button on our wall monitor. We had protocols, medications, nebulizers, but within 60 seconds, I knew it wasn't enough. Her chest wasn't rising normally. She was panicking, and I could feel her heart thudding like a bird in a cage. I grabbed my phone with one hand and dialed 911, holding Lily's trembling body in the other. My daughter, disabled, 7 years old. She's in respiratory distress. Please send someone now. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking questions I barely heard. I remember rocking Lily in the living room, whispering to her that help was on the way, even as my own tears soaked her hair. My husband ran to the gate, just in case, to make sure there was no delay. But we didn't expect what came next. The ambulance arrived within 5 minutes, lights flashing, siren wailing like a scream through our perfectly trimmed neighborhood. I saw it from the window. Relief washed over me for a moment. But then it stopped, just 50 yards from our door. Stopped, not because of traffic, not because of a technical issue, but because of a human barricade. Karen. She was standing at the front gate of the community, arms crossed, blocking the keypad entry panel with her body. She was in her usual attire, pressed slacks, blazer, HOA badge clipped neatly to her chest like some kind of sheriff. She didn't move as the paramedics stepped out of the vehicle, urgency in their voices. She didn't flinch when they explained they were responding to a pediatric emergency. She just stood there, icy and immovable, and said, "This is a private community. You can't enter without authorization." From inside the house, I could barely hear the conversation, but I saw the gestures, the EMTs pointing to their radios, to their vehicle, to the blinking address number above our garage. Karen didn't budge. She stood tall, gesturing at a clipboard she held, some kind of policy form, waving it like a legal shield. The seconds ticked by like hours. My daughter was losing consciousness, and the woman who ran our HOA had made herself judge, jury, and gatekeeper. I ran, barefoot, still in pajamas, hair wild. I sprinted down the driveway like a madwoman. Lily was in my husband's arms now, her body limp, head lolled to one side. I don't even remember screaming. I just remember the burn in my throat and the way my legs nearly gave out when I reached the gate. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shrieked, tears and snot and sweat mingling on my face. "That's my daughter. She's dying. Let them in." Karen didn't look at me at first. She glanced at the EMTs again. Without a resident escort and gate code confirmation, emergency vehicles are prohibited entry unless cleared through HOA protocols, she recited like a machine. Page 6, Section 12. This has been standard since last month. Protocols. I screamed. "She can't breathe." One of the EMTs stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've got a child in critical distress. We are authorized under state law to respond immediately." Karen turned to him, expression blank. "This is a private road. Without HOA access approval, you're trespassing." "I'm the damn parent." I yelled, fumbling with the keypad. "I'm standing right here. Open the damn gate." "She's not approved to override vehicle entry," Karen snapped. "Only board-authorized residents can open the access lane for non-member transport." The EMT looked at me. "Can we lift her over the gate? Or carry her?" My husband had already started walking down the street, Lily limp in his arms, her lips now dusky blue. I'll never forget the sound of her gasping, wet, hollow, shallow, as if her body was begging for permission to stop trying. The EMTs grabbed their bags and vaulted over the gate, one twisting his ankle slightly but pushing forward. They sprinted toward Lily, equipment bouncing, as my husband laid her gently on the sidewalk, like she was made of glass. Meanwhile, Karen stood there. Just stood there. one hand still resting on the keypad, watching it all with the cold detachment of someone who had convinced herself she was right. A woman so buried in policy that a child's life meant less than a clause in a neighborhood manual. They intubated Lily right there in front of our neighbors' manicured lawns. My husband knelt behind her, holding her hand as they worked. I watched as oxygen surged into her tiny lungs. Her eyes fluttered. Her fingers twitched. She was alive, but barely. When the ambulance finally loaded her in, the EMTs motioned for me to follow. I turned back just once and looked at Karen. "Did you see what you did?" I said, "She almost died because of you." Karen didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, clipboard still in hand, her heels clicking against the pavement. At the hospital, I stayed curled beside Lily's bed while machines beeped and whirred around her. Tubes, monitors, oxygen. The doctors said if the ambulance had been delayed 5 more minutes, her lungs might have collapsed completely. They used the word permanent damage. I used the word lawsuit. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a neighbor. It was a screen grab from the HOA community group chat. Karen had posted a message. "Unfortunate medical emergency earlier. As always, we must remember to follow procedures and maintain standards. No exceptions." No exceptions. I stared at that phrase for so long, I memorized it. When Lily finally woke up, her first word was Max. Her second was home. I lied. I told her we'd be home soon. But I knew something had changed. Something deep. A line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. Later that night, the hospital social worker asked if I had any support. "Not in that neighborhood." I said, "Not anymore." And just like that, I realized something horrifying. Karen hadn't just blocked an ambulance. She had blocked our place in the community, our right to safety, our right to exist there at all. The beeping of machines became my new soundtrack. Cold linoleum floors beneath my feet, fluorescent lights that never dimmed, and the slow, rhythmic hiss of the oxygen pump feeding air into my daughter's lungs. Lily lay curled like a doll, tiny against the massive hospital bed, her face pale, her eyes half closed in a sedated slumber. I sat beside her unmoving for hours. Time blurred. The nurses came and went, whispering updates I barely registered. I held her hand and counted each breath, terrified one might be her last. The doctor finally came in with guarded eyes and a clipboard he gripped like a shield. "She's stable," he said, "but the lack of oxygen may have caused some strain. We won't know the long-term effects until she's fully awake." My heart dropped. Long-term effects. Strain. It was all coded language for damage. Harm. Scars we might not see, but would live with forever. And all because of a locked gate. A rule. A woman. While Lily slept, I tried to sleep too, curled in a stiff plastic chair, jacket thrown over me like a blanket. I closed my eyes and saw her lips turning blue again. I heard her shallow breathing. I saw Karen's face, stone cold, unmoved, over and over like a nightmare stuck on loop. I had thought I knew what helplessness felt like raising a disabled child, but this was something else. This was cruelty inflicted by choice. When the nurse brought me a cup of coffee, she paused and said gently, "I saw what happened. My cousin lives in Willow Creek. It's all over the neighborhood group." I blinked at her. "It is?" She nodded. "They're talking about it. Some are furious. But a lot of people are saying you overreacted." I clenched the cup, so hard it nearly cracked. "Overreacted?" I whispered. She stopped the ambulance. Later that day, I checked my phone for the first time. Over 20 messages, mostly from people I barely knew. A few neighbors, a couple of distant friends, even my old high school classmate, who now worked in local news. Screenshots. Comments. Karen had already posted a clarification to the HOA forum. Her message read like a corporate apology. Certain steps must be followed to preserve safety and accountability. Any misunderstandings are regrettable and will be reviewed with the board. Misunderstandings. My daughter was in ICU, and she called it a misunderstanding, not a mistake, not a failure, not negligence. Just regrettable. I typed a response, deleted it, typed again, deleted. What could I say that would change anything? People like Karen didn't bend to facts. They bent facts around themselves like armor. When Lily finally opened her eyes again, she whispered, "Did Max come?" I held her hand tighter. "He's waiting for you at home, baby." She smiled faintly, then fell back asleep. Her smile felt like a thread tying me to reality, keeping me from unraveling. We stayed in the hospital for 2 more days. I didn't leave her side. My husband came and went, juggling phone calls with our lawyer and work, bringing me food I couldn't eat. Every time he came in, I could see it in his eyes, the guilt, the helpless rage. He felt what I felt. Powerless in the face of a machine we had no control over. The HOA, Karen, the whole warped system that had decided we were an inconvenience. When we finally came home, our driveway had a new notice taped to the garage door. Unapproved signage or objects displayed during medical event may violate HOA Code Section 9.4. I stared at it for a full minute. My hands trembled as I pulled it off and tore it in two. My husband said nothing, just picked up the pieces and threw them in the trash. Inside, Lily's drawings were still on the fridge. Her crayons were scattered on the table where she'd last used them. Max barked and ran to her, tail wagging like a motor. For a moment, it felt like we had come back to normal life. But normal didn't live here anymore. That night, we regret the unfortunate timing of a medical event within the community earlier today. Due to standard access procedures under the HOA's vehicle entry policy, received an official email from the HOA. The board has reviewed the incident and finds that the response protocols were applied correctly based on current policy. Any perceived delay in emergency access falls within the scope of Section 12. HOA is not liable for individual outcomes tied to noncompliance with entry protocol. As a courtesy, your most recent fines have been waived. Waived. They thought waiving $75 citations would make up for a near-death experience. My hands shook as I read it. I wanted to scream. To drive to Karen's house and bang on her door. To drag her to the hospital and make her look into my daughter's eyes. Instead, I went to my desk and wrote. I wrote down everything. The timeline, the policies, the gate, protocol, the footage Nicole had given me months ago, the medical records, the emails. I created a file so thick it barely fit in the drawer. I told myself it was just documentation for the lawyer for the lawsuit we'd now decided to pursue. But deep down, it was something else. It was armor, proof, my own form of justice. But justice didn't come easy. The neighborhood turned cold. Some neighbors stopped making eye contact altogether. Others offered fake smiles and quickly ducked into their cars. The ones who had once nodded at us from across the lawn now pulled their kids inside when Lily played outside with Max. The message was clear: we were a problem. And no one wanted to be seen standing next to the problem. Nicole tried to visit. She brought cookies and sat with me on the porch while Lily napped inside. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "Everyone saw the video." I looked at her. "Then why is everyone treating us like lepers?" She hesitated. "Karen told them you were exaggerating, that you staged the whole thing to sue the HOA, that you're using your daughter to manipulate public sympathy." I couldn't believe it. Or maybe I could. Karen was a master at flipping narratives. She lived on control, and when she couldn't control us with rules, she controlled the story. I asked Nicole if she would testify if it came to court. She paused. "I want to. But if I speak up, I'll be fine too. They're already watching me. I got a citation for wind chimes last week." She looked down at her lap. "I'm sorry." I didn't blame her. Not really. But it still hurt. "My lawyer advised me to go public. They're gaslighting you," she said. "The HOA is counting on silence. You need to expose it." I wasn't ready. I didn't want to turn my child's trauma into a headline. But then I remembered the email. She's watching everything. Karen had already weaponized our privacy. Maybe it was time I turned on the lights. I sat down and wrote a post. Long, raw, honest. My name is Melissa. I'm a mother, a neighbor, and a resident of Willow Creek Estates. Last week, My disabled daughter nearly died when our HOA president blocked emergency medical services from entering our community. I have the records, the statements, the timestamps, and I have the trauma of watching my child turn blue while a woman with a clipboard enforced a rule instead of showing basic human decency. I posted it on Facebook, Instagram, local mom groups. I didn't expect it to go viral, but it did. Within 48 hours, the post had over 200,000 shares. Local news stations reached out. Disability rights activists reposted it. People across the country sent messages of support. Mothers, nurses, paramedics, even HOA board members from other states who were disgusted by what they saw. Karen issued a press statement through her lawyer. She called the post defamatory and deeply misleading. She said she had followed protocol and that the family in question has a history of conflict with the HOA. That phrase, family in question, like we were suspects in our own horror story. We received threats too. Not many, but enough to rattle me. Stop smearing her name. One message read, "You're just milking the disability card." Another said, "If your kid is that sick, maybe you shouldn't live in a place with rules." But the support drowned them out. A group of parents from the school started a petition to demand Karen's resignation. Local news ran a segment. The county commissioner called for an investigation into discriminatory practices in HOA neighborhoods. And through it all, Lily asked me one question: "Are we going to move?" I didn't have an answer. I loved our home. We had poured so much into making it safe, accessible, bright. But walls don't keep out hate, and beauty means nothing when it hides rot underneath. I started to look at the house differently. The windows where I once hung streamers now felt like surveillance spots. The garden beds were no longer places of joy, but reminders of every warning letter I'd received. The front gate, that damned gate, haunted me like a memory I couldn't erase. Still, I didn't want to leave in defeat. I wanted to stay and fight, not for revenge, but for change. So I filed the lawsuit, publicly, loudly, and I promised Lily we're going to fix this. Even if it's not for us, it will be for the next little girl in a wheelchair who just wants to live without fear. And deep in my heart, I made a quiet vow to Karen. Though she'd never hear it, you tried to bury us with silence. But we came back with a voice, and we're not done speaking. At first, I didn't know if anyone would care. I had posted my truth with trembling hands, unsure if it would even reach beyond a few angry moms in the local Facebook group. I wasn't an influencer, just a desperate mother with nothing left to lose. But by morning, something had shifted. The notifications wouldn't stop. My story was being shared and reshared. Comments flooded in. Messages. Strangers from across the country, mothers of disabled children, veterans, EMTs, even school teachers, were all reaching out with one united voice. This is unacceptable. Some cried. Some swore. Some offered prayers. Others offered lawyers. My phone rang for hours. Local news outlets, online journals, national advocacy groups. One reporter from a disability rights nonprofit scheduled an interview for that evening. I sat on my porch with Lily in my lap and Max beside us and poured my soul into that conversation. I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't have to. The truth was horrifying enough. I showed the timeline, the photos, the emergency room report, the HOA policies. I even played the voicemail Karen's assistant left after the incident, cold, dismissive, procedural. The story exploded. By the end of the week, hashtag Justice for Lily was trending on Twitter. National disability advocates picked it up. A former senator who had lost his son to a failed 911 response tweeted, "If an HOA has the power to delay an ambulance and justify it with a policy, then the system is broken." People began investigating Karen. A Reddit thread with over 10,000 comments unearthed past HOA decisions, similar cases where Karen had enforced rules with inhumane consequences. One neighbor shared how she was fined for installing a temporary ramp for her elderly father. Another had been threatened for having an oxygen tank delivered after cancer treatment. Karen's pattern wasn't new. We were just the loudest case. because this time the victim was a child who nearly died. The national media followed. Good Morning America called. A segment aired that week. They used the hospital footage I reluctantly gave permission for, the grainy clip of Lily on the sidewalk, gasping for air as EMTs worked frantically over her. The image of Karen standing by the gate, clipboard in hand, unmoved, became iconic. It wasn't just our story anymore. It was a symbol of how bureaucracy, when left unchecked, can become cruelty. That clip haunted people, and it mobilized them. Disability rights groups filed formal complaints to the state housing board. Civil rights lawyers offered pro bono representation. A class action suit was initiated by other residents in Willow Creek who had also suffered under Karen's rule. They started coming forward, neighbors who had stayed silent out of fear. Nicole was the first to join the lawsuit. Then a couple named Brian and Tessa, who had been fined thousands for installing a backyard swing for their autistic son. Stories poured out like floodwater breaking through a dam. Karen tried to fight back. She issued a cease and desist against me, claiming defamation. My lawyer laughed. "You can't defame someone with documented truth," she said. "If anything, we should be the ones suing her for harassment and negligence." So we did. The lawsuit became public record. National news picked it up again. We were suing the HOA for endangering the life of a disabled child, for creating discriminatory barriers, and for deliberate emotional harm. Karen was named personally in the suit. She responded by going into hiding. No more press conferences. No more smug community updates. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. Dozens of residents packed the small community center. Some came in support. Others came to watch the fire burn. Nicole stood with me at the front. I brought copies of the gate policy, the time-stamped 911 call, the emergency dispatch logs. I read from them aloud, slowly, making every word burn. "Here," I said, holding up the document, "is where it says only authorized vehicles may enter without prior notice. And here," I flipped the page, "is where it says medical emergencies are excluded." She broke her own rule. She enforced her version of it, and it nearly cost a child her life. Gasps filled the room. A few people shouted. Karen wasn't there, but the rest of the board was, including her two longtime allies. I could see the cracks in their composure. Their eyes shifted. Their hands fidgeted with their clipboards. The crowd was no longer passive. They were awake, angry, embarrassed that they had let this go on. A vote was called. Effective immediately, Karen was removed as HOA president. Her two allies resigned under pressure the following week. A special committee was formed, made up of parents, veterans, and caregivers, people who understood what it meant to need help without delay. The gate policy was overturned. Emergency vehicles would now have immediate, unrestricted access. In fact, they installed a new emergency sensor system. No keypads, no authorizations, just sirens and open gates. But that wasn't enough for me. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for every family like mine who had been silenced, punished, or ignored in the name of order. I started speaking publicly. I was invited to panels, to town halls, to disability rights conferences. I told our story again and again. I talked about Lily, about fear, about the quiet violence of bureaucracy. And every time I stood on stage, I ended with the same words. They tried to silence me, but they gave me a microphone instead. And people listened. The story led to proposed state legislation. A bill was drafted requiring all HOAs to include emergency access clauses that could not be overridden by local policies. Lawmakers began reviewing discrimination protections for families of children with disabilities. My lawyer and I were consulted for impact testimonies. Lily's story became part of a legal movement. I remember one moment, months later, when I was sitting beside Lily in the park. She was drawing again, butterflies, like always. A woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "I know who you are," she said softly. "Because of you, my HOA can't block my daughter's therapy van anymore. Thank you." I didn't know what to say. I had set out just to save my child's life. Instead, I had stumbled into saving something more. The right to breathe freely, not just in body, but in dignity. Karen never apologized. She moved, eventually, quietly. No ceremony, just boxes and a moving van that came at dawn. Some say she sold her house below market. Others say she's now on the board of another HOA somewhere far away. I don't care. She's not in our lives anymore. But the scars she left behind, they remain. And maybe that's okay, because scars remind us that survival is real. That pain didn't win. That even when you're pushed to the edge, when you're treated like a problem to be filed and fined and locked out, you still have a voice. And that voice can be louder than every gate, every rule, every policy. And sometimes it's the voice of a little girl, giggling, alive, with chalk-stained fingers, drawing butterflies in the driveway of a house that now feels like home again. We didn't move. That might surprise you. After everything, after the trauma, the humiliation, the threats, the hospital visits, the lawsuits, you'd think we would have run the moment the dust settled. But we stayed. Not because we forgot what happened. Not because we forgave. But because this house, with its creaky steps and scratched hardwood floors and scuffed front door, this was Lily's home. And you don't abandon a home just because someone tried to poison it with power. Instead, we replanted, not just the garden, though I did pull out every root of Karen's favorite roses and replace them with sunflowers, Lily's favorite. I mean, we replanted our lives, our identity, our peace. It was a slow season of healing, of rebuilding trust with neighbors, with ourselves, with the idea of community, because when you're betrayed by the very place that's supposed to protect you, you start to question everything. Some people never came around. They still averted their eyes when they saw me at the mailbox. Others tried to offer awkward sympathy, half-hearted apologies tucked behind tight smiles. But a precious few, became family. Nicole, of course. She stood by us from the beginning, and over time she became more than a neighbor. She became Lily's honorary aunt, brought cupcakes on hard days, showed up at every one of Lily's art shows with flowers. And then there was Mr. Halverson, the grumpy war veteran across the street, who once complained about our recycling bins. After the incident, he started waving, then talking, then bringing over hand-carved birdhouses he made just for Lily. Every kid deserves to see something that's just for them, he told her one afternoon, kneeling down beside her chair. That was the day she drew her first bird, a red cardinal perched on a sunflower with the word safe written above it in glittered gel pen. It was little moments like that, small acts of kindness, that slowly pieced me back together. Lily, as always, was the light through the fog. Her recovery wasn't instant. There were nights she'd wake up crying, struggling to breathe, not from illness, but from memory. We learned the difference. We comforted her. We taught her to name her fears out loud, so they wouldn't own her. And she grew. Brave, smart, gentle, stronger than I ever imagined a child could be. She kept drawing. Every week, she created a new butterfly of the week, each one with different patterns, each one with its own name and story. Hope, resilience, echo, grace. Her drawings became part of our town's annual children's fair. She won ribbons. She donated them to the local children's hospital. For the kids who still have to be brave, she said. And somewhere in the middle of all that healing, I changed too. I stopped being afraid of my voice. I realized that the pain we went through, as cruel, as violating, as dehumanizing as it was, had carved a deeper space in me to hold compassion for others. I started speaking more, not just about our HOA, but about disability rights, emergency access reform, caregiver trauma, housing discrimination. I sat on panels. I helped write policy drafts. I shook hands with people in power. But the most powerful thing I did? I listened. To the mother of a wheelchair-bound son whose school refused to build a ramp. To the grandfather who was fined for having oxygen tanks visible on his porch. To the nurse who was fired for standing up for a disabled patient's housing needs. And to the woman who came up to me after a town hall with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "I thought I was alone until I heard your story. You're not alone. That's what I want you, yes, you watching this right now, to know. Whether you've been silenced, sidelined, or shut down. Whether you've been told that you don't belong, that your child is too much, that your needs are a burden, that following the rules matters more than being human. I want you to hear me when I say, you are not too much. You are not a burden. You are not alone. And even if you're shaking, even if your voice is breaking, even if you've never stood up before in your life, you still have a voice. And it matters. It matters more than their clipboards, more than their bylaws, more than their smug little meetings where they pat themselves on the back for preserving standards. Because you are the standard. You, the caregiver. You, the parent. You, the disabled person fighting for one more breath of dignity. You, the neighbor who chooses kindness over comfort. You are what makes a community worth living in. And the people who try to gatekeep safety, who weaponize rules to control and shame and exclude, they're not preserving community. They're strangling it. This isn't just a story about an ambulance and a gate. This is about every system that chooses power over people. Every official who thinks a spreadsheet matters more than a struggling child. Every neighborhood that closes its gates to those who don't fit in. So, if you're watching this and you're angry, good. Let that anger move you. Let it write letters. Let it attend meetings. Let it spark conversations. Let it vote. Let it build ramps. Let it protect. And if you're watching this and you're crying, good. That means your heart is still open, still soft, still human. Hold on to that. The world needs your softness more than ever. And if you're watching this and you feel broken, I want you to know something. We were broken too, but we got back up. And you can too. Because sometimes it takes one little girl with butterfly drawings and a therapy dog and a mother with nothing left to lose to change everything. We didn't want this fight, but we fought. And now, somewhere out there, another ambulance is getting through faster. Another child is breathing easier. Another gate is open. Another story, maybe yours, is about to be told, and that makes all the pain worth it. So, wherever you are, whoever you are, keep going. Keep speaking. Keep hoping. Because you are not alone. And hope still lives here. If the story moved you, if it made you feel something, anger, hope, heartbreak, then don't just scroll past. Subscribe to HOA Karen Shorts, where real voices are heard, true stories are told, and the silent are finally seen. We shine a light on the dark side of suburban control, one injustice at a time. Speech Balloon, leave a comment and share your story. You're not alone, and your experience matters. Eyes watch. Repeat button share. Collision speak up. Because next time, it could be your gate. And together, we break them open,